We've arrived at Postmodern Design, Chapter 22. This chapter identifies 5 major directions of postmodern graphic design that include early extensions of the international typographic style by Swiss designers who really diverge from the dicta of the movement. New Wave typography, which began in Basel, Switzerland, through the teaching and research of Wolfgang Weingart. The mannerism of the early 1980s with focus on the work from the Memphis Group in Milan, Italy, and on San Francisco designers retro, the revivals and reinventions of earlier design models, particularly the European vernacular and modern design from the decades between the world wars, and the electronic revolution of the 1980s that was generated by the Macintosh computer. Here we see the major directions and influences again on postmodern graphic design. Now, it's a very diverse style, and that's why the final spread in your design history journal requires 2 pages, not just one, to cover postmodern design, which is the heading. Let's take a look at how that will work. Here's a good example by Jordan Esquerra, and notice here his heading is Postmodern Design, and there are 3 substyles: deconstruction, new wave, and retro vernacular. You'll be able to see his entire journal, but he stayed with the format that he had established, but he's got the hierarchy of type correct in terms of those 3 substyles. During the 60s, the terms supermannerism and supergraphics were used to describe work that broke with modern design. Supermannerism stems from the term mannerism, which was a stylish art of the 1500s that really broke with the natural and harmonious beauty of the High Renaissance. Supermannerism was first used as a derogatory label by proponents of modern design in reference to the work of young architects who broke from modernist design. Supergraphics describes the application of concrete graphic form to architecture, usually geometric shapes and letter forms that brought vitality and color to the built environment. Philadelphia-born Robert Venturi, the original and most controversial supermannerist, added large-scale lettering to his architectural vocabulary. He saw graphic communication and new technologies as important tools for architecture. The supermannerist architect Charles Moore called on graphic designer Barbara Solomon, who had studied graphic design at the Basel School of Design, to bring vitality and order through supergraphics to his 1966 project, Sea Ranch. It's a large condominium project in California. Barbara Solomon was a San Francisco native and painter who studied in Basel and used a palette of pure hues and elementary shapes in compositions that transform the totality of the space. Here we see the style characteristics of postmodern design deconstruction, which is our first sub-style. It broke with the international typographic style communications. It was intuitive. It was trying to communicate emotional qualities with really expressive type. You'll see layering and overlapping, and computers were used to generate both layouts and typography. Siegfried Odermatt is a Swiss designer who we talked about in the International Typographic Style chapter. He broke away from that style in the 60s. Here's a trademark that he designed for the Union Safe Company in 1966 that is really the antithesis of Swiss design. The letter forms in the word union are jammed together to form a compact unit, suggesting the sturdy strength of the product, sacrificing legibility in the process. A shift away from modern design began in the 60s when designers who were with the ITS expanded its parameters as they experimented with a broader range of design possibilities to enhance communication and meaning. Among the pioneers who really evolved the international typographic style are Rosemarie Tisi, who we see here, the partner of Siegfried Odermatt, another contributor, and Steph Geisbuehler. Odermatt and Tisi deviated from the strict requirements of the grid and intuitively composed form in a more relaxed and expressive manner to communicate ideas and meaning. Rather than align these images in boxes ordered on a grid, her images appeared to be intuitively and randomly placed. Here's Steph Geisbuehler. He was a Swiss designer and partner at Chermayeff and Geismar. Complexity of form is never used as an end in itself in his designs. The dynamic of multiple components forming a whole grows from the fundamental content of the design problem at hand. Careful structural control enabled Geisbuehler to organize vast number of elements into a cohesive whole. Here's an ad for a pharmaceutical. Now, when you drink your medicine, it goes down the pipe, and that's what he's showing us in this very clever brochure cover. Wolfgang Weingart was an internationally known graphic designer and typographer. His work is categorized as Swiss typography, and he's credited as the father of New Wave or Swiss punk typography. During the 1970s, practitioners and teachers schooled in the ITS tried to reinvent typographic design, like Herbert Bayer or Jan Tichold and others had done before them in the 1920s. These new directions, inspired by the experimental work and teachings of Weingart, were labeled New Wave typography. In 1964, Weingart came to Germany from Basel, Switzerland, where he had studied with Emil Reuter at the Basel School of Design. And in 1968, he joined Armin Hoffmann on the faculty of the Basel School. From 1968 to 1974, he worked with lead and wood type on the letterpress, which defined the horizontal and vertical constraints of type since the era of Gutenberg. Within this context, he began to challenge the objectivity, absolute order, and precision of the ITS, as well as time-honored traditions of letterpress type and the more recent traditions of photographic typography. He questioned everything and basically broke all the rules. He infused feeling and humor in his work, and he encouraged his students to do the same thing. Working on the letterpress, he experimented with printing curves by bending straight metal rules and using magnets to position the element on the press bed. He exaggerated letter spacing in contrast to the tight letter spacing made popular by phototypesetting to create typographic texture. He invented new typographic forms by combining characters in unexpected and absolutely whimsical ways, like a colon turned on its side becoming an umlaut, a comma on its side maybe becoming a letter U. This method enabled Weingart to compose complex visual information, unify type and pictorial images, and juxtapose type and image with textures, which were often created by enlarging halftone dots or overlapping halftone screens to create moire patterns. Dan Friedman, April Greiman, Willie Kuntz, and Kenneth Hebert, all of whom spent time at the Basel School with Wolfgang and afterwards came to the United States to teach and practice, helped spread that new design sensibility. Although Weingart and others who had pioneered New Wave type rejected the notion of style, by the late 70s and 80s, their work was widely imitated. Among the design conventions adopted as New Wave were sans serif type with a lot of letter spacing, ruled lines that punctuated and energized the space, type placed on a diagonal, font changes within a single word, type reversed out of solid bars, and bold stair-step rules. Friedman, who also studied at the Ulm Institute of Design, rethought the nature of typographic forms and how they behaved in space, as shown in this cover that he designed for Typographic Monthly Sheets. After coming back to the U.S., he taught at Yale University and the Philadelphia College of Art, where he introduced students to the basics of new type. April Greiman was an American designer widely recognized as one of the first to embrace computer technology as a design tool. She's credited, along with an early collaborator, Jamie Odgers, with helping to import the European New Wave design style to the U.S. during the late 70s and early 80s. According to design historian Stephen Heller, April Greiman was the bridge between the modern and postmodern, the analog and the digital. I wanted to show you this China Club ad she created in 1980. Overlapping forms and movement is happening in and out of space that animates the flat typographic page. Then I wanted to show you on the right how it references L. Lissitzky's Prounds painting from 1919. This is a collaboration between Greiman and Jamie Odgers, who did the art direction, photography, and design. It's a poster for the California Institute of the Arts, and here the printed surface is redefined as a continuum of time and space. April Greiman achieved a sense of depth in her type pages. Overlapping forms, diagonal lines that imply perspective or reverse perspective, gestured strokes that moved back in space, overlapped, or moved behind geometric elements, and floating forms that casted shadows are the means she used to make forms move forward and backward from the surface of the printed page. Here's Jamie Odgers' work. Wide-angle photographs with extreme depth of field have objects thrusting into the picture space from the peripheral edges. After apprenticing as a typesetter, Swiss-born Willy Kunz completed his postgraduate studies at the Zurich School of Arts and Crafts before moving to New York in 1970. He accepted a one-year appointment at the Basel School as Weingart's replacement while Weingart was on sabbatical. Inspired by Weingart's research and the work of his students, Kunz took advantage of access to the type shop and produced a series of type interpretations of writings by the Canadian philosopher Marshall McLuhan. Although structure is evident, Kunz does not construct his work on a predefined grid, instead determining a starting point and allowing the structure of the composition to evolve during the design process. Now we move to another substyle of postmodern, New Wave. We see stair-step rules, some evidence of the grid underlying organization, layering, overlapping, and simultaneity. Let's have a look at Michael Graves' amazing product design, which became very popular even at Target. I know because I rushed to buy my own tea kettle and coffee press there. And here on the right, we see his buildings. The Memphis and San Francisco schools, as the 70s ended and the 80s began, were a new movement in postmodernism. Inspired by the 1981 exhibition of the Italian design group Memphis, led by the Italian architectural and product designer Ettore Sozzas and the postmodern architect Michael Graves, the movement was characterized by playful geometry, the use of surface pattern, texture, and color, and references to early cultures. Graphic designer William Longhauser sums up Graves' postmodern motifs in his 1983 poster for a Michael Graves exhibit. Notice the letters which spell Graves are transformed into geometric forms decorated with pattern and texture that evoke a postmodern architectural landscape. In the early 80s in San Francisco, Michael Vanderbilt, Michael Manwaring, and Michael Cronin forged a postmodern design movement that really positioned San Francisco as a creative center of design. Although the San Francisco designers shared gestures, shapes, palettes, intuitive spatial arrangements, and assigned symbolic roles to geometric elements, personal attitudes are still really evident in their work. Vanderbilt combines a casual postmodern vitality with a typographic clarity echoing his background in the ordered typography of the International Typographic style. Notice the gestural line strokes that are placed over top of this chair. That's very characteristic of his work. His poster for California Public Radio is an important harbinger of the merging school. Forms such as the lines and gestures signifying radio waves are carefully selected for their symbolic meaning. They also play strong decorative and structural roles. A rectangle negates the eye, while triangles over the ear and flaring away from the mouth signify the auditory non-visual medium of radio. Here's an innovative poster where a postmodern building sticks its tongue out at a modernist building, calling it an obsolete, boring glass box. Here's the work of Michael Manwaring. Elements are given symbolic roles and become part of the content in this Bay Area designer's work. A lyrical resonance permeates the color, form, and texture in Manwaring's graphic and environmental designs. In his series of posters for Santa Cruz clothing, graphic forms and color serve the function of a traditional headline, linking lifestyle values to consumer products. Notice the stair-step rules in the piece on the left. Again, a very strong characteristic of New Wave. And now the last branch of the Trinity in postmodern design, retro vernacular. We see eclectic modernist European design of the first half of the century. A disrespect for the proper rules of type, it's placed in new ways, and kinky mannered type of the 20s and 30s. Daniel Palavin did this book cover for Hoover's Guide to the Top Southern California Companies. We see a tightly composed linear structure presenting symbolic iconography with planes of color evoking the feeling of cloisonné jewelry. Working in the retro style, he drew inspiration from Gustav Klimt and the Vienna workshops, as well as streamlined Art Deco forms. He combines a reductive abstraction with precise mechanistic forms. Notice the lettering on this was inspired by a Gustav Klimt poster. Louise Feely is an American graphic designer recognized for her elegant use of typography and timeless quality to her designs. Her work often draws on inspiration from her love of Italy, modernism, and European Art Deco styles. Considered a leader in the postmodern return to historical styles in book jacket design, Feely explores historic typography combined with modern colors and compositions. After working for Herb Lubalin and art directing Pantheon books from 1978 to 89, she launched her own studio. Working in book design, she was influenced by vernacular design in Europe. Eccentric letter forms on signs at little Italian seashore resorts built between the world wars fascinated her, as did graphics from that same era found in French and Italian flea markets and used bookstalls. These vernacular graphics incorporated textured backgrounds, silhouetted photographs, and modernistic sans serif typefaces with decorative elements of exaggerated proportion. My favorite period is the 20s or 30s, Feely says. It just speaks to me. The typography especially is so stylish and sexy. The combination of bold sans serif letter forms with beautiful upright scripts, I never get tired of it. It was all hand-lettered. They just made it up as they went along. Every time I go to a flea market, I find examples, and they still surprise me. I'm a huge fan of her vintage touches. Louise hand draws letters, which she has created for everything from book jackets to food packaging and restaurant identities. Beyond New York, the potential of retro and vernacular design resonated with Joe Duffy and Charles Spencer Anderson of the Duffy Design Group. Inspiration came from a wide variety of sources, including old matchbook covers and newspaper ads, graphics from the 40s, traditional type, 19th century woodcuts, and decorative emblematic labels. They designed nostalgic revivals for clients as diverse as their influences, like Classico pasta sauce to Chaps Ralph Lauren clothing. In 1989, Anderson left to start his own firm, Charles S. Anderson Design Company, and the subsidiary CSA Archive, which manufactured products and publications such as a large collection of historical and original line illustration. So again, retro absolutely fascinated Charles S. Anderson. And here we see the products that he marketed to an eager public. These are watches and their packages from 1992. With the expanding possibilities of post-industrial society, a design firm could become the creator, the packager, and the marketer of manufactured goods. Here's the CSA Archive catalog of stock art. The heaviness of bold black type and illustration are tempered by an underlay of abstract shapes in 3 warm colors. Here's a book cover by Karen Goldberg, a designer who also taught at the School of Visual Arts. Here we see great retro references to Vienna Secession typography and symbols. Although it would be a misnomer to label English designer Neville Brody a retro designer who reinvented styles of the past, he did draw inspiration from the geometric forms of Russian constructivist artists, as well as Dada experimental attitudes and their rejection of the doctrines of the ruling establishment. Brody emerged as one of the most original graphic designers of the 80s as he sought to discover an intuitive and logical approach to design. He designed graphics and album covers for rock music and art-directed English magazines, including Arena and The Face. His work evolved from an effort to discover an intuitive yet logical approach to design, expressing a personal vision that could have meaning to his audience. A spread from The Face magazine by Neville Brody on the subject of Andy Warhol. Now, if you know anything about that artist's work, he was famous for printing things in multiples, so we see his image more than once. Notice the W in Warhol. There's some type above it, but it's upside down. This is because it actually came from a previous issue, an article about Madonna. So he was recycling things. Check out the balance here of large and varied text juxtaposed over this very powerful, intense photo. Paula Scher is an American graphic designer, painter, and art educator in design. She also served as the very first female principal at Pentagram, which she joined in 1991. Her use of typography and energy in design is unmistakable. She also utilizes illustration really well and can paint. These incredible public theater posters really capture the energy of the music. Here's a great retro piece. She's an outspoken designer with an ironic sense of humor. She worked as a designer for CBS Records during the 70s. By 1979, tight budgets forced Scher to develop type solutions based on imagination, art, and design history sources like Art Deco, and her fascination with obscure and little-used typefaces. Russian constructivism provided important typographic inspiration. She didn't copy the earlier constructivist style, but used its vocabulary of forms and form relationships, reinventing and combining them in unexpected ways. Take a look at her Swatch watch poster from 1985. Here she does a take on that famous Herbert Matter poster I showed you from the 1930s. It's an unabashedly parodied piece for Swatch, the Swiss watch manufacturer. The chapter closes with Paula Scher's 1994 graphic for MTV's Free Your Mind campaign, entitled "Language is a Deadly Weapon." Hand lettering and a hand-drawn image on rough paper represents the freedom to be intuitive and personal. Postmodernism heralded a spirit of liberation that allowed designers to respond positively to vernacular and historic forms and to incorporate them into their work. An atmosphere of inclusion and expanding possibilities encouraged these designers to experiment. Here, derogatory terms for women are presented to increase sensitivity to the effect that slang has on others.